So, hello everyone, and welcome to this Sifted Talks in partnership with Key Capital, titled Tapping into the Gulf: What are Eastern investors looking for in Europe? The Gulf region has emerged as a major investment hub for European startups, pumping $3 billion into Europe's high-growth tech businesses last year, almost a 5x jump from 2018 when the same countries invested just $627 million into Europe. So, what are Middle Eastern investors expecting from their European portfolio, and what can founders expect from them in return? And as competition for the region's capital heats up, how can startups stand out from the crowd? We'll also be talking about the art of doing business in the Gulf, as an increasing number of European startups have begun operating in the region. So we're going to get into it without further ado and introduce our panelists. But before that, just a note to say, please do submit your questions using the Q&A function. Those can be upvoted and we'll discuss the most popular ones. We'll do it as as we go along. So rather than a Q&A at the end, we'll just do it kind of organically as it fits into the discussion. So do just submit them if anything crosses your mind that comes up from what we're talking about. Anyway, so today we are joined by Basil Mofta, Managing Partner at Key Capital, an Abu Dhabi-based secondaries VC firm. He's got more than 20 years of experience in venture capital and company building. Previously held roles as general partner at Include, Africa's largest fintech-focused VC, and Global Ventures, where he invested in early-stage startups across Africa and the Middle East. And before that was a founding member of the Reuters Venture Capital Group. We've also got Sophia Parvizi-Wayne, founder of Kanjo, a startup building a solution to help parents and clinicians understand children's mental health. We'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. Sophia is a serial founder, having built a natural language processing startup called Trado Books during her second year at Duke University. So was ahead of the game on the whole AI hype cycle that we're seeing today. We've also got John Hartley, CEO at Levidian, a Cambridge-based startup that does carbon capture, turning methane gas into graphene and hydrogen. And lastly, we've got Mihai Mokutsa, co-founder of NodeShift, a cloud platform which offers affordable access to high-end computing. He's previously worked at companies like Epic Games, Twitter, Microsoft, and Cisco. So a great panel. And we're just going to, in a second, get into how each of our panelists have experience of working in the Gulf. So Basil, we'll start with you. You started investing in Africa, but tell me how you got specifically into working in the Gulf. And yeah, like a bit of a picture of what the investment landscape was like when you got involved in this region and where the region was at, I guess, in a wider economical sense compared to today. Oh, you're on mute.
Good point. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Tim and Sifted, for organizing this panel. And it's great to be with everybody to have a discussion about this kind of growing trend, if you like. Just quickly on my background, I started in the Reuters Venture Capital Group in the States, and then eventually ran some businesses, and then lastly did a few funds around Africa and the Middle East. And frankly speaking, over the last 5 years, it's been a super exciting, albeit late start for the region in the technology scene. So kind of what you saw in LATAM, what you saw in Southeast Asia, and definitely what you saw in Europe 10 years ago and in the US 20, 30 years ago, is starting to emerge in the region. And so the region really has two characteristics. The first is that there's quite a bit of wealth or capital being deployed both by government and private institutions into venture, seeing technology as a key trend around the world. They've invested in many funds in the US, in Europe, and Asia. They've also invested directly in many startups, including many in Europe, as you know. And so, you mentioned earlier that the growth has seen like a 5x growth over the past few years, and that's just an ever-growing trend. But increasingly, what's been happening is that money is now being directed to the local ecosystem. And so there's a whole bunch of startups, organic, local startups that are starting to build out in the region. And for me, as an investor, someone who manages funds, this is super exciting, of course, because it's late compared to the rest of the world, but a very important trend, if you like. The other part is that there are many companies relocating to the region and seeking to raise capital from the region. And the criteria for that has become increasingly higher, or the bar has become increasingly higher year on year. And what does that mean? It means that it's no longer just about giving money or investing money, I should say. It's about also what are you doing for the local ecosystem? What products and services and technology are you bringing? If you're a fund, what are you going to do to allocate some of that money in locally as well, not just take the money and invest it internationally? And that's a dramatic shift, and something that really shouldn't be underestimated, Tim, for all of those people seeking to raise capital, whether it's VCs or startups in the region.
Great, thank you, Basil. That's a really good sort of broad brush view of how things have changed and where we're at today. Sophia, tell us about Kanjo and about how you and your startup got involved with work in Abu Dhabi. Off mute, yes, lovely.
Yeah, I'm off. I think there's a lot of pivoting that went on, but so a little about Kanjo. We build predictive models that look at kind of pre-diagnosis of mental health conditions, so predominantly ADHD and autism. And that stems from my background in mental health. I was a patient when I was 16, so I was diagnosed with an eating disorder, and kind of came to see that all investment over the last 10 years has predominantly been in reactive health. So how do we band-aid something rather than look at, how can we go before they're even diagnosed? The way kind of, I guess, our introduction to the Middle East happened is, firstly, I'm Middle Eastern, so most of my family are based in Dubai. But we were actually, the Abu Dhabi government, the Early Childhood Authority was running an accelerator, and they reached out to me on a whim and were like, we're looking for growth stage companies that we actually think could fulfill what the government is currently looking at. And that is a real focus on prevention. So kind of where the way UK was maybe 20 years ago was kind of this, oh shit, we're in like a really bad place, kind of is where the Middle East is heading. They have a higher prevalence rate of these disorders, but unlike legacy systems where actually innovation is really, really hard to come by, they're much more accepting of it. So, I approached this program, it's called Anjazi, it's run by Techstars and the ECA. And they were like, we're looking for growth stage startups. And I was like, we're mid-pivot, we're actually not revenue generating, I'm going to have to build a whole team, but like, YOLO, I'll do it. And I think, our real focus on how to bring clinical practice up to speed with clinical research was kind of such a pull for the region that we ended up actually going through it. Through that, we ended up getting, investment from the Abu Dhabi Investment Office, and actually now have an HQ in Abu Dhabi and are now kind of fully present in the region as well.
Got it. Okay, we'll come on to some of your fundraising efforts in the region in a minute, but let's keep going through. So, Mihai, let's come to you. Tell me about, NodeShift, how you got started and how it came to be that now pretty much all of your team are based in Dubai.
Yeah, sure. So for good context, I mentioned earlier, my co-founder and I started NodeShift over in San Francisco because both of us worked in the tech scene over there. Ironically enough, the idea for it was actually born out of Turkey. A friend of ours was getting a hair transplant there. So me and my co-founder traveled over to Istanbul, and a hair transplant lasts about 10 hours. So you have plenty of time for discussion, which is how we started entertaining the idea of what NodeShift is today. The way we ended up in the UAE in particular was we knew exactly the type of talent that we want to hire. Usually it's focused and concentrated around the Bay Area, maybe a little bit around Seattle as well, basically anywhere where you have big cloud companies like Google Cloud Platform, AWS, Microsoft Azure, which basically attract all of this talent. Realistically, as a C-level startup, we just couldn't afford those type of salaries. Any of those companies, any of the employees in those companies, for the type of talent that we need, would ask anywhere from 500,000 to 800,000 USD per year, which we couldn't afford at all. So the idea came to be that how about we relocate to Dubai? We offer to some of the peers that we know from the industry significantly lower salaries, but we relocate them over to Dubai, where the quality of life is much higher than we would get in San Francisco. For 1 million, for 1 million in terms of real estate in San Francisco, you could barely get anything. Maybe 30 square meters in some dodgy area. For 300,000 in Dubai, you can already get some proper square footage. You get a much better quality of life in terms of the services that are around. You can easily travel to Europe, Southeast Asia. So from a location perspective, it's really great. It's also multi-ethnic, and you have plenty of nationalities. So if you like the aspect of San Francisco being surrounded by different and various cultures, different cuisines, access to different type of like, holidays and like, ingraining yourself into that type of life, you can also get in the UAE as well. So essentially, the majority of the people that we made the proposal to just said yes. We didn't expect it to be such a resounding yes, and ended up essentially setting up office in Dubai.
Yeah, great. Really interesting summary. And I think some of that, the lifestyle stuff and the logistics of moving people over is something we can get into a bit later. But John, coming to you in Levidian, how was it that, a Cambridge-based company came to be doing so much work out in the Gulf?
Yeah, we do decarbonisation of gas and decarbonisation of large industrial customers. So we did an exercise to say, where in the world can we have the biggest impact? And clearly in the Gulf, there's a huge amount of gas reserves through their oil and gas network, with lots of methane being flared or vented. We can solve that problem. But there's also a huge focus on how do they diversify their economy, and a growing number of industries out there. So for us, it was a great strategic fit. We then spoke to a number of different countries, and in Abu Dhabi, we found a real appetite for them to focus on carbon capture. This was ahead of their hosting of COP28, but also on the use of graphene, and that's the carbon material that we produce. So they had a hypothesis as a country that they wanted to be a leader in it. And so we found very quickly doors opened across the investment side. So we got some money from Mubadala customers. So we've sold to people like ADNOC and Tadweer, who are a landfill operator, and also their universities, so R&D opportunities. And I think it was mentioned earlier on that connecting those dots and building that ecosystem of different people, different organizations, was really powerful. And actually, I think if you try and just do one of them, so just seek investment without any desire to deploy tech in the region or to build jobs in the region, it's really hard. So that conversation for us started about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And now we have an entity over there. We've got 4 full-time members of staff. We got a load of projects. We got some investment. But for us, it was a nice alignment, I think, Tim, of our own strategy of where we could have an impact, and their view as a country in Abu Dhabi, as a city, certainly, of they wanted to be a leader in the decarbonisation and the graphene spaces.
Nice, yeah. Okay, well, let's come on to Levidian and Kanjo's sort of fundraising efforts, because I'm sure a lot of our audience will be interested in that. So, Sophia, as you said, you got investment from the Abu Dhabi Investment Office back in 2023, but I think we can also say that you're in the process of closing a round with a lead investor from the region. We don't want to jinx anything by mentioning any names, but yeah, tell us a quick summary of, what people should expect, I guess, across these 2 different stages of process that you've been through. Like, what are the main pieces of advice you would offer to members of the audience who might be wanting to follow in your footsteps?
It's really not that easy. I think there is this illusion that, Gulf-based investors are less sophisticated because the ecosystem is more nascent. And that is totally wrong. If anything, there is significantly more due diligence, and kind of going off what John said, more of an emphasis on like localization and proof of that localization. And, we are very early stage, I think earlier stage definitely than John is. But, it wasn't like we are thinking about moving here, and because, I'm Middle Eastern, I have a right to come and, take your money. It was very much like, is your entity set up? What's in the pipeline? And actually, I think the bar was significantly higher. So, our lead, yes, is Middle Eastern. We have an American fund coming in as well. And actually, it took a lot longer with the Middle Eastern fund, because also a lot more of it is relationship based. Here I've built this ecosystem up since I was 19 when I started my first company. And, I had spent last year, I spent 6 months over in Abu Dhabi out of the year, which includes summer, which is really painful, and no one is there. So I would never do, I mean, it's the same as like VC summer here, but more extreme because it's just too hot. But I think it's like, there are a few things I'd say is like, do give it time and really invest in the time you spend in that region with those people. And the third is like, reputation really does matter. And I think I really did focus on that, and being like, I'm very intentional with the way I hold myself. A lot of that is also with the government entities. But yeah, it was a lot. If you are really serious about the region, absolutely do it. If you're not, don't waste anyone else's time either. That's kind of my perspective on that.
Okay, Basil, I'll come to John in a second, but Basil, what rings true to you there? Because you touched upon the fact that investors, that there has been this kind of nascent growth and that there has been like a growing sophistication around tech investment. What would you say in terms of where we're at now compared to where we were?
So late last week, I was sitting down with an LP that I've known for some time, and he was mentioning that he has been seeing on average for the last year about 4 new funds a week, right? And he's not someone who, let's say, does this as a primary job. Investing in VC funds is just one of many different things. It's a family office, so they invest in real estate and other things like that. He's saying some weeks he has 10 and some weeks he has 2, but let's say on average 4. If you do the math, that's 200 funds. And he'll tell me, I honestly can't tell the difference between one or the next, right? It's like they all sound the same. Now, what stands out, he say once in a while, something will stand out. And what will stand out is somebody who understands that family office or that investor's way of thinking, has done his or her research about what it is they're looking for, spoken to others, gotten an introduction through a mutual, ideally close friend, took the time not just to pitch the idea, but also to talk about how this would benefit the local ecosystem or benefit that family business or whatever the kind of driving motivation for deploying capital is. So all of the things that Sophia mentioned really do resonate, but they touch on so many different factors. You can call it old school if you like, Tim, right? Maybe that's the old way of doing business where it was, people sit down, have discussions. They are interested not just in what you can do, but who you are, what your story is, what it is that you're looking to, make out of yourself or your business, because they want to feel like they're part of that journey. You can call it also that it's relationship based. That's the word that gets used a lot. I think many people don't understand the premise of that really and how long it takes to build relationship. Flying in on Mondays, flying out on Friday, and jumping from one meeting to the next, that's not relationship based, right? Relationship based is listening, understanding, going away sometimes and thinking about what was said and coming back with more insights or more ideas about what could happen. And I'm willing to bet Sophia's business has evolved as much as Mia's and John's since they started the conversations to where they are today, just based on those relationships and the people they've interacted with. I'll add one quick one before we jump to someone else, which is don't underestimate how small the market is here as well, right? This is like, instead of thinking of London, think of like Bond Street or something, right? Or Knightsbridge. That's the max size of this place, which means everybody knows everybody, everybody's connected. And by the time you make it from one meeting to the next, people have most likely already told the next person about the fact that you are, what you discussed and so on. So word gets around, reputation does matter, keeping your word matters, and consistency about what you're trying to do matters as well.
Got it. Let's come to you, John. You're someone who's, had conversations with Middle Eastern investors. What would you add to what we've just heard from Sophia and Basil in terms of your experience of doing business with investors there?
I think those points really resonated. So as Sophia said, a very sophisticated investment group who will ask the questions around technical due diligence, commercial due diligence, and have the same standard of bar as you would expect from investors in Europe and North America. So I think they're very sophisticated investors. I think the differences for the region are it takes a long time. So we brought Mubadala into our Series A, but they came in months after our lead investor, which was Baker Hughes. They just took longer to make the decision, and partly because they wanted to see us building that ecosystem, selling into their region, setting up our entity, etc. So I think Sophia's advice of, if you're going to do this, really commit to the time, do it properly, and have patience. And I think if your business strategy aligns with that, as ours did, we saw a real opportunity to roll out our technology as well as getting the money. It's absolutely worth it, because when you put that effort in, you can then create not just investors, but also customers. But if you find yourself trying to shoehorn your business strategy to fit the needs of the region, I think don't bother. Go and find money somewhere else. I think if you will get found out if your strategy doesn't align with what they're looking for. I think the other bit of advice is think big. I haven't come across any Middle Eastern investors who want to do things in a small way. I think if you're going to raise money, raise a decent amount. And if you want to be ambitious on what you can do with that, shoot for the stars and show the potential. I think there's an impatience among that investor audience of, we want to do big things. We want to really own the next wave of technical rollout in the climate tech space. And in our example, they are not looking to do small things and tinker around the edges. So I think, again, it goes to that theme of, if you want to raise money, commit not just to the fundraise, but to setting up there, commit the time. I spent a long time on aeroplanes going backwards and forwards, and then we hired a managing director who's very experienced out there to be there all the time, and that is invaluable, because you have such a rich week of conversation, then you disappear for 3 weeks, you drop the ball a bit. So I think being locally present is really important.
Got it. Thanks, John. Okay, we're going to come to our first audience question. This is from Tom Ruddy. I think it sort of picks up on some of the things we've said about the value of networks and warm introductions. But Tom asks, maybe this is one for you, Basil, but what is the magic to getting UAE-based funding sources to respond to submissions? I can sometimes expect a response from UK, EU sources of funds, but so far no responses at all from the likes of Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So it sounds like Tom is asking about kind of sending in a submission or a pitch deck in a slightly more kind of formalized inbox way. What advice would you give him in terms of how to get a bit more response to what he's putting out there?
We've covered it a little bit, but let me be a bit more specific. And I'd love for everyone else at John, Sophia, Mia to also say that their experience, because it's going to be different for every person. Don't email. There's about 10 or 15 emails a day of coming into my box, at least. And it's very difficult to answer them all if I even bother to answer, because many of them are not properly even written or formatted, for that matter. Don't LinkedIn. That doesn't work either. It's not really the best way to introduce yourself. Even if you think your idea is unique, there's just a lot of stuff coming in there. You want a referral, and you want a referral from someone who knows both sides well. It has to be like, this is the guy I went to college with. This is the guy I went to high school with. This is the guy that I worked with at the last job, or, you know, as far as, this is my, I don't know, wife's or husband's, you know, close friend or something like that, right? You want a referral, because people then feel like they need to respond to that. They owe something back. That's a relationship based. That only opens the door. The rest is on you. The pitch, the idea, the rest, you know, it sits with you. But you want someone to make that intro. That being said, if you're in early stage, there are a number of programs in Saudi, in UAE, that are also worth applying to. So Hub 71 has a program, for example. I think Sophia can talk about that a little bit more if I recall one of the things that she did here. And then you have 500 Global, which isn't really the same 500 that you may know from other parts in the world, but has a big presence in Saudi Arabia. Antler has a big presence. Plug and Play, Techstars. These are programs that are actually sponsored by the government funding entities. So Hub 71 is a Mubadala program, believe it or not, and so on. And that, again, is very formal. They have a process. But even there, I suggest you find somebody who can make a referral. I'm a Hub 71 fund, if you like, or I'm based out of that office. And so they come around and say, do you have anybody you want to recommend? And I will tell them, I met these guys, these 3-4 companies this last year, and I think those are interesting. So even if you're applying to a formal program, having someone give a little nudge is helpful, because they will receive thousands, literally, of applications. And it's sometimes hard to filter based on just paper.
Got it. Yeah, we actually, go on, John, you come in.
I think the hard bit in that story, I agree with the points, is if you don't have a network, if you don't know somebody there already, it can be very hard. And we didn't when we started. So I didn't have a personal network there. Levidian hadn't, operated there before. But what we got very quickly was a sponsor. So someone who liked us, who understood our story, and who then opened doors for us. So if you're sat there listening to this thinking, I love the idea of having someone in that region who can help support me, but I don't know anybody, I would say get on a plane, go and talk to some companies, knock on some doors, explain what you're doing, And it might be you then get a sponsor who then opens doors for you. But without that, doing the anonymous, LinkedIn or emails, I just don't think will work. I think investing time up front to get that person to have your back is really important.
I actually have something to add on that as well.
Yeah, please do.
Firstly, everyone ignores you anyway. Like, I get ignored all the time. I think this is just something to add up. No one uses email, everyone uses WhatsApp, so don't get offended if like no one responds to you. Honestly, like one contract we've been trying to close has taken 9 months because no one checks their emails. It's just like not an email based place. The second thing is I also came in despite, being from having family there. My uncle sells cars. It's not like he is in the ecosystem whatsoever. And I think for us, it was actually, understanding people that had done it before. So John, a good example is lots of our investors were at Vision Fund before, and then a lot of the Vision Fund guys went to Mubadala. So I ended up going for coffee with someone at Mubadala who then opened up a lot of doors for me and has now become a very good friend. So I think it's like a lot of it is like initiative taking and like trying to find the loops within like how to get there. And the second thing is like, if your LinkedIn says you're based in London and you're doing all these London things, and there's no evidence that you're going to the region for anything except for money, why would anyone respond? I think that's another thing. It's like your outward facing also needs to show that you're invested in the move, because if you're not, surely you'd pick someone who wants to build in the region over someone who's coming for money. I think that might be another point to make. Like optics count.
Got it. Mihai,
just wanted to jump in with one last thing. Everyone was talking theoretically about how you can get connected to people within the region, but I'm just going to show an example live on the call. So Basil mentioned, you might give someone a little nudge, in order to get into a program. So Basil, this is for you. We actually finalized the 4th-stage interview for Hub 71. We had it this Monday. So we don't know the result just yet, but I'll ask you very nicely if you can just, put in a good word for us as well.
Sure. Of course. Happy to.
There we go. We had another question.
Live on TV. By the way, the WhatsApp point that Sophia made is an important one. WhatsApp is the main mean of communication. If you're being introduced on WhatsApp, that's a good connection. Email, it's old school. It's for, the old generation.
Got it. Okay. I feel like this will be very useful in terms of saving people from wasting their time, but also quite daunting. So good luck to everyone who's got to kind of start from zero building that network. Something we've kind of touched on there, but we've got a question from Vania Pinto here about other incubators. So Mihai, you just mentioned Hub 71. Are there others in Dubai or elsewhere in the region that you'd consider? Like what are the other options, if any?
I mean, from our perspective, we were very conscious about the reason why we wanted to apply to Hub 71 specifically. Ironically, when we moved to the UAE, we didn't realize that we wanted to target the local market. But while connecting a few of the local data centers, for additional context, we provide a cloud platform at a very affordable rate. We found out while being in the region that in order for you to process data of UAE citizens and residents to begin with, you actually need to be processing it locally in a local data center. So we realized that there's a massive opportunity that was untapped by the massive cloud providers, the likes of Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS. They're just starting, to get their feet wet in the region now. So there's a massive potential for an up-and-coming cloud platform like us. So we're thinking we already have the data centers. We don't need to wait like the big cloud providers. We have the capacity. We just need to somehow get to the customers. So from our perspective, we started wondering, okay, how do we get the customers in the region without knowing much about the region to begin with? So we've spoken to a few founder friends, and Hub 71 was one of the recommendations from a go-to-market perspective of how you can tackle the region to begin with.
Nice, great. I've got another audience question here from Jock Richardson, who says, maybe a silly question, but he says that he's had all sorts of supposed interest in investment from the Middle East, but he says he's pretty sure most of it is scammy, begging the question how to do decent due diligence on potential investors. Basil, maybe that's one for you. Is that something that you've seen in terms of people trying to, like, scammers jumping on the bandwagon of this supposed pot of gold in the Middle East?
Yes, so definitely there has been an increase in scamming activities in the region on the back of some of this, and on the back of what we're describing. The region, given where oil prices are, economic development, government refocus, etc., there's been a lot more money being put through the system, if you like, in different investment verticals. The biggest scams are in real estate, just to let you know. So, if you're buying real estate, you really want to check out who you're buying it from, and because that's the most common and the one that's broadest from a population perspective. But some people have targeted kind of the VC industry and try to set up little, Ponzi schemes or thing. They'll take your startup, try to represent it to others and take money in between, or tell you they're investing 300 and go raise 400. I mean, there's all sorts of kind of funny little stories like that I've only heard secondhand, and I have not witnessed firsthand, but I've heard it from people that I would trust, let's say, or people that I would believe. So yeah, absolutely. But I don't think that's the big one, if you know what I mean, right? I think that the premise of the question is about how do you do due diligence on someone else, so to make sure you're not wasting your time as well. And I always say founders are good with founders. So when you're here, you should speak to other founders, especially successful ones, and who have good cap tables, which again should be, on their website, or should be by looking at VC's website and seeing which companies they've invested in. Because founders share information. I mean, just as much as VCs do, founders do. And I know I have my popular group, and I know I have my slightly less popular group of founders, and people will say, oh, he's a great investor, or some people say, Bessel takes too long. That's the way it goes. And I think by asking around, you'll usually triangulate relatively quickly on the ones that really stand out. No one has a perfect track record, just to be clear. So don't take one comment and act on it, but talk to several people, and then I think you'll quickly understand which of these investors you're looking at. If you're doing early stage, I highly suggest you use an accelerator, or you use one of the investment groups. There's Dubai Angel Investors in Dubai. There's OQAL in OQAL in Saudi. There is Acacia or Cairo Angel Investors in Egypt. There's different ones in different markets. And again, that's when you get to meet, like, I'm part of Dubai Angel Investors. There's 99, 98 or something like that of us together in one group. So you can only imagine that we all bring deals, we all vet them with each other, and we all share and so on. So again, using those networks will allow you to do multiple ones as soon as you get an in to one of them.
Got it. I'm going to just stick with some of the audience questions specifically related to investment, and then we'll come on to some other themes in a bit. But we've got one from Simon here. He says, if my company's based in France with no particular focus in the Gulf, for our seed round, should we try and pitch any Gulf-based funds? I assume there are also some funds that have a global investment scope and are just looking for good returns. So maybe just a quick one, Basil, like, do you think, is there any point, if you're not trying to do work in the Gulf, in trying to pitch funds, or, was it really only capital available for those who are looking to contribute with what they're doing in the region?
Later stage. I think if you're later stage, we have an established business, probably doing over $1 million in ARR, maybe a couple of million, given the current environment, then I think you can raise capital, because people are interested to invest in Europe and in the States. They've done a lot through funds, and increasingly are doing more direct. Okay, so absolutely. But if you're early stage, I think that's going to be difficult without a proper introduction or something that's really referred. But if you're doing later stage and you've established yourself and you want to go raise a Series A, let's say, yes, I think you'll find interest. Again, you'll still need the same tactics of referring, but it won't, but there will be interest. But you just have to be a bit more formidable, let's say, in your sector.
Cool. Got it.
I think I can add a little bit to that.
Yes, please.
I think the one thing I've heard from like quite a few people in the region is like, the region shouldn't be like a last option when it comes to early stage. Like, if you haven't been able to raise in France, or maybe that's the case, it's not like you're suddenly like, oh, I can't raise in France, therefore I should go and try to buy. Like, people can see through that. And I think, kind of going back to what Basil said, it's like going through an accelerator. We've been through 2 now, which I can talk to more. Like, I know Vanya kind of tapped on it once, and obviously there's quite a few for women as well, which is really great. Like, if that accelerator makes sense, the one we did with the government actually was equity free and $300,000 in cash as well. If it makes sense, that's like the easiest way to show that it's not a last resort. It's like you're dedicating your time, your team, your resources to the region, and then go and do it. But kind of, yeah, I kind of agree with Basil on the later stage stuff. Like, some later stage funds clearly have a mandate to predominantly invest outside of the region, whereas early stage, they want companies there.
Makes sense. Okay, so given that, we'll come back to any sort of specific investment questions that the audience might have on the Q&A, but given that earlier stage companies might well be thinking about doing business in the Gulf if they're looking for investment there, just wanted to ask you, Mihai, like, you moved to the region, as you said, for hiring and talent reasons, and we are seeing that, more and more founders anecdotally are setting up shop there. It feels like there is a big momentum towards Dubai and the UAE more broadly. How would you say the talent base is developing in the time you've been there? Like, what are you seeing?
It's a good question because we've actually tried to recruit locally as well once we've relocated a lot of the talent. From our perspective, we still feel like in order to get the type of talent that we need to look for them abroad and then relocate them over to the UAE region. The really high quality talent that is available in the UAE is also pretty expensive for relative terms, because those people have relocated there for a reason too. And I'll give you anecdotal evidence as well. So we've met with the chief revenue officer of DigitalOcean, a pretty large cloud company, and their CRO actually sold his company Cloudways to DigitalOcean. He's originally from Pakistan. So what he's mentioned is that he actually wanted to build almost like a hub in Pakistan, but he wasn't able to convince people from the US and Europe to relocate there. So what he's done, he built a hub, and within that hub, he poached top tier talent in terms of execs over from the US and Europe as well. So now suddenly you find yourself in a situation where there's a lot of high quality talent in the UAE as well, but it's unattainable for a company like us. So if you want to get more attainable talent that is still top tier, you got to figure out a way how to actually attract them into the region and attract them into the country as well. That was at least specifically for us. And that was more on the engineering side. Now, from the business development side, I definitely think that locally is the way to go, because you need someone, that truly understands the market. And we just started getting our feet wet in the region just to understand, how to properly approach it, and how to learn more about the market to begin with.
Nice. Yeah, I'll come to you as well, John. You talked about hiring a managing director there. To you, what's important when you're looking for talent in terms of, local knowledge, trying to attract people to the region? What are you thinking as you expand your operations?
Yeah, I think a network there is really valuable. I remember talking to our investor and saying, I'd love to hire an Emirati to be our managing, our regional lead. And they kind of chuckled and said, good luck trying to find an Emirati who's going to work for a startup, because there's so many employment opportunities over there. So we ended up hiring an expat, a brilliant British guy who's been based over there for a while, who had a great network. But I think trying to find an Emirati when they have so many employment choices is really tricky, or that was my experience. The other challenge, although the talent pool is pretty deep there, you have to pay people a lot of money, and it's not just the salary, it's the other benefits. And if you open your team's eyes up to the salaries over there, they might get poached by somebody else, and that's happened to us a couple of times. So I think there are pros and cons of building a business out there, but the labor market is really hot. I think you have to pay people well, look after them well. And if you are working out there, if you have a network, you can be pretty picky as to which jobs you do. Got it.
And in terms, I think there are maybe some misconceptions perhaps about, living in somewhere like Dubai. There are obviously stories about people being kind of locked up in jail for quite long periods of time, quite strict on things like drinking alcohol, but obviously so many more people are moving there. Mihai, what would you say are the things that people get wrong about living in Dubai in terms of what that lifestyle is like? Because you mentioned the high quality of life, but, describe how perhaps this, this conservative idea of the country that people have might be different to the experience.
Sure. And before I dive into the answer, just wanted to say that Basil just did an email recommendation to Hub 71. So just want to say a huge thank you. So, the warm introduction is working out already. But yeah, getting back to your question, Tim, I think for me personally, there wasn't a significant cultural difference to begin with, and assimilation necessary. For context, I'm from Eastern Europe originally. We're a pretty conservative country at heart. So I feel like from a value-based perspective, the way UAE is and the way Eastern Europe and my homeland is, I'm from a small country called Moldova. I didn't feel sort of any difficulties getting accustomed to that. So everything that is common in my country is similar in the UAE. The type of talent that we hired is pretty diverse in terms of, like, the countries we're from. They're all from all across Europe, some from the US even. We didn't struggle there either. I mean, no one really struggled from an alcohol perspective, or maybe getting different types of meat. Those sections are available everywhere in the UAE. Like, if you want something, like, let's say even stuff like pork meat, you'll be able to get it. Like, if that's what you wish. The specialized areas, if you're like really keen on alcohol, like, like you can get there. But to be fair, whenever we were hiring talent, no one ever wondered, oh, how am I going to get, my pork chops, or how am I going to get my wine? What they were for is the fact that, finally I can have childcare that is affordable. Finally, I can have an actually good school for my kids that is easy to access. Oh, finally, I don't have to worry about my safety when I go outside. So people would approach it from this angle rather than the other one.
Nice.
Tim, I can probably add a little bit to this if it helps.
Yeah, can I I'd like you to, but it's perhaps interesting. We got a question from Robert Day, who said, can he speak to differences between the ecosystems in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai?
I was actually going to mention that. That was kind of what I was going off, particularly when it comes to culture, and also within, like, look, fundamentally, it's respect. I think that's like the first thing you should, and it's like the same thing. It's like, if I went to go and see a frontier, would I go in short denim shorts? Probably not. Would it be slightly more acceptable? Yeah, wouldn't do it. But I think the one thing is, like, there are differences between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, even though they're a narrow drive away, right? So when I go to the office in Abu Dhabi, I actually dress quite different than I do in Dubai. Even though they are like literally 60 minutes away, particularly in Riyadh, the rules change quite quickly, right? So the idea of, though, side note, I used to be a professional athlete. So everywhere I go, I still train, I still compete. In Dubai, I have a running club. Our investor actually owns a gym. So my life is very much like laid out when I'm there. But in Riyadh, the first time I went, one of my friends was like, only run in the diplomatic quarter, be pretty covered out of respect. And I was like, by all means, I'll do that. And then when I came back the second time, actually the gym that was originally gendered was now mixed in the hotel. So I think it's like, you just need to be aware of the changes that are happening. In Riyadh, they're a lot quicker, so it seems. And in Dubai, like, it kind of just, it's very similar to London. It's just respect. So, if I go to a government meeting, I do wear a long sleeve t-shirt, long trousers. I spoke at Leap in Riyadh, and I was like, this is a time I would wear an abaya. And it's just like basically fundamentally about respect and what's expected of you in those different places. But like, at no point do I feel like a cultural difference or like not comfortable.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really good insight. Basil, is there anything you'd like to add to someone who's been there for a while? Like, what should people bear in mind, culturally speaking?
Yeah, I mean, I have my fair share of reading, UK media especially, and kind of seeing it misconstrue some of the cases that have happened here. Every place you go in the world, you need to respect local laws, local traditions. I don't think that's a regional issue. I think that's a global issue. If you're in Japan, if you're in, you would, I don't know, bow your head when you're giving your business card or whatever the case might be. There's respect, as Sophia mentioned, that's required in every culture, every place. That being said, Dubai is definitely the most progressive. And so most people feel very comfortable in Dubai, and it would be no different than being in London, New York, Singapore, or wherever else. Outside of that, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, even more so, are still progressing and still making the reforms necessary on a social level. That being said, I myself, as an Arab, if you like, from Egypt, I'm surprised by how much progress has already happened in the region so rapidly. So again, depending on when was the last time you were here, you would probably find it surprisingly, more open and more liberal in all of these places. But I think if your intention is to be here, be professional, to do business, have a social life and go out and enjoy yourself, etc., you'll be perfectly fine. If you're looking to commit a crime, do drugs, go off the rails, then there's laws just like everywhere in the world that are enforced just like everywhere in the world.
Yeah, okay, well put. We've got a question that I think this might be quite a good one for John. This is from Achim Hoffman. He says at the moment his startup's got no connection into the region, but as an early stage UK SaaS startup, would want to connect into the oil and gas ecosystem. What is the best starting point, investors, industrials, or accelerators? So yeah, in terms of kind of getting into that world, John, I guess you're someone with good experience.
Yeah. So ADNOC within the UAE is the obvious place to start, both because of their scale, but also because of their ability to connect you with other players in the region, because they really do control the ecosystem very well. So I would say to whoever asks a question, drop me a LinkedIn message. I know the right people at ADNOC to speak to, and SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, I assume that was the area, is a really hot topic at the moment. So I would say if that's your business, the UAE is a great place to go. You'll also get interest from the other players in the market. So I would go and talk to the Kuwaitis at KPC, at the Saudis at Saudi Aramco, probably get on a plane and spend a week talking to people. Yeah, please connect with me. But I would say for that, specifically for that area, the energy deployment, because they're so strong at it, I would start with the customers who also have investment arms rather than the accelerators. See if you can get real traction, get a quick yes, that's interesting, or a quick no before you start thinking about setting up, would be my advice.
Nice. God, connections happening all over the place today. So Achim, do reach out to John for some more insights there. I wanted to ask a bit more, it kind of follows on from this, but Sophia, you've spoken about the fact that your startup kind of interacts with government, healthcare systems, legacy systems, but that there's this kind of exciting thing there that because it's a new and emerging economy, that there is a bit less kind of legacy baggage to deal with. So could you just paint a picture of how you've navigated dealing with those different stakeholders and what people should be aware of in terms of the opportunity of, I guess, digitizing and modernizing a system that has less, I guess, embedded ways of doing things?
Yeah, it's a learning curve. Still not there, I've got to be honest. It's still quite early. I think, look, there's this thing, and I remember the first pre-pivot Kanjo was also looking at similar things. And I remember initially my naive 22-year-old, 23-year-old self was like, our GTM is going to be NHS within a year. Doesn't happen, right? As in the loopholes we have to do even to get regulated here, which we're almost done, touch wood, takes a very long time and it's very, very expensive. And, when you look at the NHS, I kind of look at, I'm saying this, my dad's a doctor, I'm allowed to, he gives me permission. There are kind of three things they're looking for, right? Which is efficacy, but most importantly, like cost efficiency and like how it slots into a pre-existing system, which is already inherently bureaucratic and very fractured. So every ward is totally different. And we work within the NHS here as well. With the region in particular, there is a lot more scope to innovate and like experiment. And that's particularly because they're building them themselves now. So one of the largest players in healthcare, which I won't mention, but we work quite closely aside, is basically starting they're bringing out so many new innovative ways to look at neurodiversity. And because they are one of the first to do it, they are looking for startups to come and do it alongside them, right? Because fundamentally innovation happens in smaller startups than it ever will at a higher governmental level or large institution. And you're not facing the backlash of, but we have done it this way for the last 30 years, therefore you cannot try. So I think, what we've been doing is like exploring so many POCs, being like, look, we don't even need to integrate into your EHR, your electronic health record. Why don't we just try this? If you don't want to pay us, that's fine, as long as you can cover our costs. And I think kind of the ability to even showcase that actually wouldn't have happened in the UK. And it's because of what we've been doing in the UAE that now the doors to the NHS seem slightly more open.
So
right?
More receptive testing bed.
Totally.
John, how would you say that compares? Because obviously it's this huge momentum behind climate tech in the region and the sort of push to create green technologies. You featured in an article in Sifted alongside some quite wacky ideas, kind of like pillars in the desert to kind of, spray water in the air and cool the air down. Like, how would you describe the way the UAE is, I guess, like this ambition and the way it's kind of adopting new ideas that others might not?
Yeah, they see a real strategic opportunity to take the assets and the capital they're raising, because oil and gas prices are high and they're very abundant, clearly, in their country, to take that and then to own the next wave of the decarbonisation tech, which we're going to need to use to get to net zero. So I think it's a subject area they're really keen on. It was pre-COP28. I would say that really spiked because they were hosting it, but it hasn't gone away. I think they also understand they've got this unique geographic position. We haven't talked a lot about this, where they're still doing business with Russia and with China and with Asia and with the States and with Europe. So to make the most of that geographical or geostrategic position and the capital inlays to kind of own companies in a number of different markets, they really see that opportunity, and they have impatience to use that now because of this moment in time that they have. So that means if you can play into that theme, and if you can say, look, we are part of the next wave of industrial decarbonisation and owning the energy system, the net zero system of the future, you're going to open doors. To go back to our first bit of the conversation, you'll open doors with that. You won't get anything unless you've got a great pitch, great commercials, great technology, because the bar is really high. It's not enough to say, we play into a theme that you like. That might get you a meeting, but it won't get you the actual money. So I think if you're in the climate tech space, to be honest, the market globally is really hard at the moment for people raising money. The Middle East maybe is a slightly more open to investing, but it's still a difficult process.
Yeah.
Can I just add one quick thing? If you go online, you'll find for Saudi, there's something called Vision 2030. For the UAE, there's something called Strategy 2071, if I remember correctly. And these are dedicated websites that have laid out the government's view of their future plans. And it is down by industry, by sector. It includes actionable, KPIs, if you like, or measurement tools that they will use to measure this with. I mentioned this because it's all in the public domain. It's not a hidden, thing to figure out. Now, of course, finding the right person, the right department, the right area may take a bit more networking, relationship, and so on. But where UAE sees itself in health or in environment, or sees itself in clean tech or cloud computing, has been laid out in very, very specific text online. And it's not a long read, it's worth familiarizing yourself there before you even begin to kind of figure out how you line up your startup to the national agendas.
Yeah, that's a good point. This doesn't have to be guesswork for people. So do use those resources that Basil just mentioned. This is a bit more of a practical one as we are getting to the end, but I think it could be really useful for people considering relocating. So I'm going to come to you with this one, Mihai, and then possibly Basil afterwards. It's from Jock Richardson. Any comment on legal frameworks would be useful. How easy is it to enforce contracts? Do people generally do what they say they're going to do? Is there a litigious culture? And I'd also like to ask you about, what were the main costs bureaucracy-wise of getting set up? Like, what are the practical steps and what costs should people bear in mind in that way?
Yeah, so we failed big time here from setting up an entity perspective. So we set up a branch so just for reference, we're a Delaware C Corp. And we set up a branch in the UAE, in Dubai specifically. We didn't really know how to approach it, so we sort of used online resources that we could find, and we found a person online, and it was the worst decision possible. We feel like, we were taken advantage of in a very major way. We were later introduced to a founder friend, to someone that properly helped us set up. And we realized what a big of a mistake we have done. This is why I think there's a massive value probably in local accelerators, or at least working with local funds, because they can actually support you in alleviating a lot of those issues that you would have otherwise had. Just for reference, in order to set up that branch, it cost us around 25 to 30,000 when it could have been, way less. And to be fair, we could have set up an entirely different legal entity, which would have cost us pretty much nothing. But again, we only learned based, on doing this mistake to begin with. And, there's nothing that we could do about it. Another one is choosing the right bank. I'm not going to call out the bank, but we made such a horrible mistake there. Still paying the salaries for that bank is the most painful thing I've ever done in my life. And bear in mind, I've grown up in the north of Moldova with no toilets. So this is truly painful. This is horrendous. That banking system makes me cry every day, even though there's amazing challenger banks that, again, I only learned later on. It's just transitioning from one bank to another is a massive pain point. And again, these are 2 points that we're going to alleviate by the end of this year. But I guess the main advice out of this is just please speak to the local people in the region. Try to learn as much as possible before you actually commit to anything.
Yeah, could you recommend what banks people should use just to save people some time?
Yeah, it depends what type of entity, but for me personally, it's WIO. I really love them.
Y Bank.
Why? WIO.
WIO.
WIO. WIO Bank. We say, well, people say it different ways, but WIO is another way to pronounce it. No, listen, just on the contract enforcement, there's a notion or the idea of onshore and offshore in the UAE, or like a free zone, and then let's say a regular country jurisdiction. Most companies, most businesses would establish themselves in a free zone. And depending on which free zones you pick, the majority of them are under English law. So they're actually following the English court system. They have their own arbitration, their own, jurisdiction, etc. I mentioned that because that clearly becomes the bar. English law is the bar globally in terms of corporate law, etc., etc. And if you're selling shares in your company or raising capital, I highly recommend you use that level. Either you establish yourself abroad and set up a branch, like Mia said, and you sell at the corporate level or the headquarter level, or if you're going to set up your headquarters here, use ADGM, use the IFC. There's a bunch of areas, Media City, etc., where you can kind of follow that. In terms of onshore, where you come to do business, so again, if you're doing business with a government entity, you're going to need an onshore entity to be able to do a contract, etc. And there's some nuances to this. Usually with startups, they'll make exceptions, and they'll kind of look the other way because you're too small to have multiple entities. But as you grow, they're going to ask you to have a local entity as well. And so then you're subject to local jurisdiction, local laws in terms of enforcement. The issue isn't if there's a court system. The issue is that the court system is slow. And the issue is, what are you going to do? Sue the government, especially if you're doing something with one of the big, entities here? Not because you couldn't, of course you can, but it's just not going to be the best of arguments to have. So you want to protect yourself contractually with things like, payment terms that are very clearly defined, or upfront, costs being covered, and then maybe the kind of performance fee towards the end. There's lots of different ways to think about it. And I've recommended to many of the startups I work with that they be very upfront with the entities about this and say, listen, hey, I'm going to do this project for you. It's going to cost me, I don't know, $300,000. I was going to charge you, I'm going to charge you $500,000. I need $300,000 in the first 3 months or whatever it might be to make sure that covers all my costs. The rest you can pay me when I deliver the project, right? And it's kind of people see that as a fair deal. You may say, but they still owe me 500. Again, it's a mentality of doing what's right by the customer and doing what's right by your business as well.
Right. Okay, we have come to the end of our hour. So thank you so much to everyone who's joined and asked questions. There's loads of really good ones that I hope will be useful to lots of other members of the audience as well who are thinking about doing business with people in the Gulf. And of course, a big thank you to all our panelists, John, Mihai, Sophia, and Basil. It's been really great to kind of get different perspectives of people working in the area in different ways. I feel like we've covered loads of really good stuff from, how to make ins, the nature of doing business there, working with different stakeholders, what is of interest to people in the region and what's not. So I think it's been really kind of practical stuff. And of course, a really big thank you to our partner, Key Capital, for their support. Sorry if we didn't get your question. It's been a pretty tight discussion with lots of, big perspectives to fit in. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining today, and do look out for our next Sifted Talks. So thanks everyone.